Welcome, Sally, to this edition of Leading with Body Intelligence. I am so grateful to have you here. I remember you were my first podcast guest many years ago before COVID. So it's really exciting to have you back. And as you were sharing with me, things have changed for you. I know you have another book out since How Women Rise. And you mentioned that you are the number one global guru now. So that's pretty exciting. Can you tell us exactly what that entails?
Well, it's just that's looking at the people who are considered by their colleagues around the world to be the most influential thinkers. And that's specifically in leadership. They do a variety of different things. They do marketing, they do, all kinds of areas of expertise. But for leadership, that was the opinion of my colleagues. So that's very gratifying. It's one reason that's especially terrific award. Since How Women Rise became so popular, I've gotten a number of awards, but that one is very meaningful because it's the colleagues who vote.
Yeah. And I would echo that. You have, Sally, been very influential in my life, reading your book. And I can't tell you how many people that I have recommend read your book.
Yeah.
It's among my top three. How Women Rise, the Thin Book of Trust and Self-Compassion. So whatever that lineup means, that's what is usually what I find people can really benefit from. How Women Rise. Let's talk about that for a moment because that, remind me, what year was that book first published?
2018. So it's been 6 years now.
6 years.
Mhm.
Yeah. And how, what have you learned from your readers in that amount of time?
What I've learned from my readers has been really interesting. First of all, I've learned from my readers that these habits, although in some of the ways that they show up are different, they are so resonant with women in wildly different cultures. We've sold the book in 24 languages. I've worked in 37 countries doing programs, doing master classes and leadership programs. And it is remarkable that very different cultures, Japan, Brazil, Egypt, South Africa, Finland, China, the book's very popular in China, India. There's so much resonance for this book, and people feel like it was written about them. And that has been fascinating to me because there's such cultural differences there. So Turkey, Mongolia, we got a Mongolian edition up there. I never thought that would happen. Vietnam, etc. So that's one thing I've learned is that there's so many similarities among what women experience and how they respond to their experience around the world and in very different cultures. The other thing that surprised me was how resonant these habits were for women at different levels.
Mhm.
I remember when I first started doing programs and they would have these programs for, I mean, when I say program, I mean a talk or a workshop, whatever I'm doing with a group, usually corporate, but association, all kinds of educational group. Next month, I'm doing the Association of Women Prison Wardens. I mean, this is when I talk about I'm cutting a wide swath. This book does it. But at first I thought, if women are very senior levels, they're not going to identify with this. They're going to feel that they've done this, they've been through this, they've addressed these issues. And sometimes when the client would call me in, they'd say, these are very senior women. So when you talk about these habits, be sure to frame them in what they need to know to mentor women coming up. So I'd say, okay, okay. And I would, and then the women would be wanting to talk about it for themselves. So that's another thing that surprised me. And these two takeaways have really been interesting. One more has been how interested men are in how women rise. I've been writing, I mean, I've written 8 books in this field, and I've never had men, when they come to events, they'd always be, sign this for my wife, and then they slip out early with the female advantage or the female vision, et cetera. They weren't that, they didn't see it as useful for them. That has not been true here at all. And I remember going to an event I was speaking during a women's leadership program, construction super conference in Las Vegas. And I said to the client, who's going to be there? They said, probably about 100 women who are struggling to make their voices heard. I said, sure. That's what I would have thought. I got there were 300 people, about 65% of them were men. And they just said, there's something we're not getting. We're not getting the how of doing this. We know it's important, but we don't know how to do it. So that's really been fascinating. It also indicates to me that it was a book whose time had come.
Yes, indeed. I'm glad that you raised that up because it reminds me of working with a gentleman, and he was the first one that I had recommended How Women Rise.
Uh-huh.
He was thrilled to have the recommendation. He acknowledged he was because he could see the value that women had to offer, but he could also see where they were holding themselves back.
Yes.
And to read this and be able to mentor and to help them and just understand better was really beneficial to him and his team.
Exactly. And I think the nature of the book is very tactical, very practical. Here's what it is, here's what it feels like, here's often why it happens. But here are things you can do. Here are practical ways you can address this. And I think that makes it particularly helpful rather than being more just descriptive.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, here's a question for you, Sally. 2024, if you were to write a new edition of this book, are there any new habits that you would add, or do you feel like this is pretty timeless as it is?
I do feel the second way. I do feel that there's nothing, and it's the first time I've written, written a lot of books. I mean, I've written 8 in this field, so I've written quite a number of books. Also, other books that aren't in this field, and I've never before felt like I didn't leave anything out. Before, I always thought, why didn't I put this in? Why didn't I? I should have talked to so and so. This would have been an interesting point. Somehow here, I got the habits. I mean, I was collaborating with Marshall Goldsmith. So we would talk them through. He was surprised at some of these habits. I mean, building rather than leveraging relationships. He just sort of couldn't believe that. Putting your job before your career, which is one of the habits in the book too, he was astonished by. He said, "Why would anyone do that?" Well, they do it. So it was. I think that having that back and forth. I also had an editor who was very involved. So all those things kind of helped. But no, I don't feel like it would need to change. And if I were going to do a new edition, I would simply put in a new introduction that would update the very different times we're living in.
Mhm. Of the 12 habits, is there one in particular that you find really resonates with people?
Oh my Lord, yes. It's the expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions. that is such an aha often for people. Obviously, it goes with the first habit in the book, reluctance to claim your achievements. We're reluctant to talk about what we, what was successful for us, what we did, what kind of positive feedback we had, how we met our target, whatever it is. We're reluctant to talk about that. Oh, somebody will think I'm arrogant. They'll think I'm all about me. I've had real pushback. I've been accused of not being a good team member because I talked about what I'd done. Or, maybe it's just, I don't know how to talk about what I did when I'm supposed to be a member of a team. So, I prefer to talk about the team. So all those things hold women back. And so rather than what they do is they sort of outsource the work of articulating their contributions to other people in the hope that they notice, or the expectation, I believe if I do great work, people will notice, or I believe if I do great work, people should notice. Well, sure, they should, but they often don't. And this has only gotten more challenging since so much work has gone to virtual since the pandemic. So that's a default position.
Yeah.
And it does not serve us at all. We all have to find a way to be very clear and to talk about what we did. Now, that doesn't mean we have to do it like we've seen how men whose behaviors, or some women who are very, willing to brag and talk about how great they are, doesn't mean we have to do it like them. And
Right.
that's another reason that I find women often, well, if I have to be like that guy down the hall, no, thank you. But we can do it in a way that reflects who we are. Using the language of contribution is one of the ways, instead of achievement. My team did this. My contribution was. That's a much more comfortable way. Presenting what we've done as information that could be helpful is another very strong way to do it. I know you're going into this meeting with this client. Let me tell you the response I got 2 weeks ago when I met with them, what they found particularly helpful. This might be useful to you. So we're making this sort of as an offer, being helpful to them, and at the same time sharing how we got a positive response to something. So there are all kinds of ways we can do that. We don't have to feel that it requires us to say, well, I did this and I did that, which a lot of women are not comfortable with, and which often, unfairly is perceived as arrogant when women do it and just confident when men do it.
True. And I'm happy to hear you using that language of comfort. What's comfortable?
Yeah.
And I say that just because of my own work in somatic awareness. When we can feel comfortable, we can feel safe, and we can present as our authentic selves and be okay with that. And, that's something as I've really since I've developed my work in the area of somatic awareness, as I see the content of your book through just a little different lens. And as I was going through the 12 habits, I'm like, these have a common theme with the threat response, particularly with the freeze response, is what I noticed.
Mm. That's so interesting. Yes, because when we do something, when we kind of force ourselves, I've got to tell him what I did. When we force ourselves like that, first of all, we're sort of, we've got blinders on. We're not acknowledging what we're feeling, which is, this is uncomfortable for me. No, I'm going to do it anyway. This is uncomfortable for me. So we're losing awareness. That's often reflected in our breathing, in the pitch of our voice, in the speed of how we present something. I need to tell you that. So it doesn't come off as ourselves. So I think you're really right there. The threat response, the freeze response. What's the freeze response?
Well, the freeze response is when the body senses that the real or perceived threat is too much to fight or too much to flee from. So it really encompasses overwhelm. So the one habit here that really jumps out at me is the people pleasing, because that's a subset of the freeze response, which is called fawning. So if I can do everything that I can to make you like me, I'm more likely to survive versus, yeah,
Mhm.
please.
You know, that's so interesting because yeah, I've watched that so often, just that idea that what I need to do here is not be noticed or pretend I'm not noticing something.
Yes.
You know, we saw, I mean, to me, the most vivid illustration of that was when Hillary Clinton in the second debate was literally being stalked on stage by Donald Trump. He was looming behind her. He was physically, it was a very deliberate thing, physically working to intimidate her. And she made the decision, which was a poor decision,
Mhm.
of kind of pretending it wasn't happening and not saying anything and just a little bit moving around. And to me, the message that sent is that she didn't look like a leader, because a leader pushes back. A leader who's being threatened says, no, 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 this is not working. You can't do, their basic message is, you can't do this to me.
Mhm.
And that was not being sent. So I think that, and that is a very important point, because what the pleasing does, you know, pleasing is one of those what got you here won't get you there habits, in that it can serve you well early in your career because
Mhm.
everybody thinks you're a nice person, they want to work with you, et cetera, et cetera. But as you move more into a leadership position, it is going to upend you, because it is basically saying that you're not a leader,
Yeah.
because leaders have more ability to stand in their own experience
Mhm.
and not, you know, and trust their gut and, you know, stand up. They stand up. Message is, if you can't stand up for yourself, how can you stand up for other people? So I
Absolutely.
think it's very, very important. Also, there are all the things with pleasing that are so problematic. When you get into a higher position, it's hard to delegate because somebody
Oh,
might not
yeah.
like what you're asking them to do. You know, it's hard to set boundaries because somebody might be upset if you say, no, we're not doing that. You know, it's their pet project, they want to do it, maybe they won't like me, that kind of thing. It just is a very, very, I'd say that the perfection trap and pleasing are
Mhm.
the two habits where you pay the highest cost in a leadership position.
Yes. I like how you said that. You pay the highest cost. And what would you say that to you, what is that cost?
The cost is that you're, even as you're trying to make everybody happy, you are undermining your ability to be seen as or be taken seriously as a
Mhm.
leader. So you're sending these very conflicting messages. And as you move into a position of more authority, where you have more scope, more responsibilities, you have to hand them off to people.
Yes.
And what pleasers, perfectionists often do things themselves because, well, only I can do it perfectly. You know, I can't trust this person to do it perfectly. You know, how can you trust someone to do it perfectly? It's a sort of ridiculous expectation.
Mhm.
But with pleasing, people end up doing other people's jobs because, oh, I know she's having a hard time right now, or, well, last time I asked her to do something like this, she really didn't want to do it and she pushed back. So it's just easier to do it myself. So they end up, just being overwhelmed, being completely overwhelmed, and creating a tremendous amount of stress for themselves in trying to, perfectionists create stress for other people as well as themselves.
Definitely.
But pleasers are trying to take the stress away from everybody else, so they're shouldering it and bearing it,
Mhm.
and that makes, at some point that just kind of blows them up. It's a path to burnout.
Yes, a path to burnout and a path to unhealthy team dynamics.
I agree with you on that. Unhealthy team dynamics are a consequence of pleasing. And that's partly because other people see what you're doing and then they think, she can do it. I don't really need to step up here. And what it does is it tends to undermine the commitment of the team to excellence, or even its ability to execute on excellence. So everybody is sort of, I'm not talking about being driving people, but
Mm,
people are failing to reach their own potential because they're not being held to account. And it's not good for their development. It's not good for their development. They um they they probably could do better and learn more from doing better and look better.
yeah.
But they just become part of a kind of lazy team.
And that when we're doing better, that requires feeling safe because when we co-regulate with one another, so the more the leader can feel safe, the more the rest of the team can feel safe. And when you're safe, you can be curious. You're coming from your strategic thinking and you're growing and you're developing and you're coming together with unity as opposed to when you are stuck in that threat response, you're operating from the amygdala and you get tunnel vision. You're in a protective mode, which creates division, and you're co-regulating really under a sense of fear.
That's so interesting. So you look at pleasing, probably in perfectionism as well, as consequences of, to some degree, feeling not safe.
Yes.
Hmm. I hadn't thought of it in that way. That I think that's very interesting, and that there's strong truth in that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Sally, thank you so very much for this time together to highlight your book, How Women Rise. Would you also like to mention the title of your
Of
your
course.
other books?
Well, I just want to put in a plug for my most recent book, Rising Together, which is about creating more inclusive cultures, not habits, but more inclusive cultures. And it takes very much in the same way that How Women Rise did, it takes that behavioral approach. Not, we don't need to search for unconscious bias. Let's think about what inclusive behaviors might be, how we can cultivate them, and how we can enact them. So there are a lot of similar principles, and it's been really interesting to work with this, with Rising Together.
And I have that book in
Good.
my queue of books, which I can't wait to read. And it's really, I think about, culture, so important. And it starts with leading yourself first
Yeah.
and feeling safe,
Yeah.
feeling
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah,
So,
really safe. And
anything,
it can be tough in this
oh yeah,
environment because, every single organization is so diverse, so people can feel a little bit unsafe, or they can feel worried, or, I don't know what that person's thinking of me. So it causes us to shut down instead of open up. Yeah.
It really does, because that's another, when we go into that freeze response, we get
Mhm.
really small, that shutdown, versus if we fight or we flee, that's a bigger response.
Yes,
But we
exactly.
can tune in and we can notice when that's happening.
Yeah.
And we could, the secret is calming our nervous system. There's many ways to do that. One that works particularly well with people is first, noticing that
Yeah.
sense of being, small, and asking, is this unsafe or just uncomfortable?
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
can
that's a good
do,
question.
yeah, what we
That's
can
a
do
good
the
question.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, we can do uncomfortable, because guess what? Practicing any new behavior is going to be uncomfortable just because we haven't done it before.
Right.
And so we can't think our way into becoming comfortable. We have to act our way into becoming comfortable by
Mhm.
practicing that behavior, and quite soon it will be completely comfortable.
Exactly. The more we do it, the more we can. And then we expand our window of tolerance so
Mhm.
that we're not as easily triggered.
And that's why it's important to distinguish, is it unsafe or is it uncomfortable? Because if it's unsafe, our response should be very different. It shouldn't be to just say, oh, well, it's unsafe, but I'll just do it again, and it'll get comfortable. No, we need protection. We need allies. We need to tune into our awareness. And when we feel something's not safe, we need to honor that.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, when it's literally life or death, we want our bodies to work the natural way they do, and just a knee-jerk reaction rather than stopping to think. An example that I'll give when I'm speaking to folks is, have you ever touched a hot stove?
Mhm.
Did you have to think about whether you would move your
Exactly.
finger or not?
You got it.
That's the difference.
Yeah, that's
And,
the difference.
the more resourced we feel, the safer we feel. So little things too, like when, people pleasing and you're just feeling overwhelmed, simply talking to a trusted colleague
Yeah, of
can
course.
really lift that weight and help feel more safe, and then be able to come from that prefrontal cortex versus the fear, the survival mode, the influence of the amygdala.
Very good. Really helpful. Thank you.
Yes, yes, and thank you. Sally, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience, how they can stay in touch with you, access your books?
The best way is always through my website, sallyhelgesen.com. It's got a contact button. The email comes through. I was just answering one 5 minutes before we talked, and lots of information about my programs and what I do, and uh, lots and lots of resources.
Well, thank you for everything that you do, Sally, and thank you for being here for this edition of Leading with Body Intelligence.
Thank you, Jennifer. I've enjoyed every minute.